Right, so a second round of exploding pages and walkie-talkies is being reported, largely on social media, it has to be said at this moment in time. It's very much a developing story. But this time it isn't Hezbollah being targeted in Lebanon in a pager attack, but the Syrian army of Bashar al-Assad, coinciding with an assault on the provinces of Aleppo and Idlib by so-called Syrian rebels, but who are actually little more than a rebranded version of Al-Qaeda. Reports of this pager attack, however, pretty much nail on allegations that have been made already, suggesting Israel could be backing Al-Qaeda in its modern form, with Israel's shady Unit 8200 and Mossad intelligence agency having been implicated in the only other pager attack we've ever seen. That was only a few months ago that happened in Lebanon, and now we're seeing another, it seems. And the victims this time being the Syrian army itself. So is this all part of Israel's planned wider war, and now they have a ceasefire such as that is in place with Lebanon? Is Syria next on Israel's list then? Right, so over the course of the last several days, as many of you may well be aware, the Syrian army has come under attack in Aleppo and Idlib by primarily an assembly of jihadist groups led by one in particular called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, which is much easier to say, the leadership of which consists of the remnants of the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda. Not a huge amount heard from them since the death of Osama bin-Laden, really, but they persisted in pockets across the Arab world, and they've regrouped and reorganised, it seems, in Syria at least, and that begs questions as to how they frankly managed that, which I'll come on to in a moment. But what we have here at the moment is, in a sense, is the coming to a head of years of repression by the Assad regime in Syria. There is an element of they've asked for this, it has to be said. Assad clamped down on anti-government protests back in 2011, and you can't simply repress people by coming down harder on them. It doesn't work, they just continue to resist, and Syria has been at civil war ever since, by and large. In that time since that started in 2011, more than 500,000 people have been killed, millions more displaced, and Syria's industry and infrastructure has been decimated. And then on top of that, of course, there is Israel's conduct in the Middle East too, and its desire to see a wider war spill from Gaza and Lebanon. This has also included strikes on Syria too. The Golan Heights are occupied territory belonging to Syria. And of course, Israel sought to drag Iran into this conflict in the hope it would trigger US forces to enter the war by striking the Iranian embassy in Damascus, the Syrian capital. Back to HTS, though. They've been taking over villages in both Aleppo and Idlib provinces, hoping to take control of the M5 international highway and thereby cut off Damascus from Aleppo, isolating two major cities and affecting transportation of goods, services, industry carrying on in Syria across the nation. The groups are being collectively referred to in some publications as Takfiri terrorist groups. And I hadn't heard of this term myself, so I had to look it up. It's all a bit John Wick as it happens. Excommunicado and all of that sort of stuff. These are excommunicated Muslim groups, proscribed groups within the Muslim world. So I thought that was certainly worth a mention, and that certainly fits Al-Qaeda. And anything that has grown out of that, you would think. And given how anti-Israel Arab nations are, so often referred to as terrorists in and of themselves, by virtue of being just anti-Israel and Western media telling what it does make a bit of a nonsense of such lazy reporting as well. Anyway, that isn't to let the government of Bashar al-Assad off the hook as some kind of benign administration beholden to attacks from outside terrorists. We know it isn't that black and white. Syria's civil war and uprising against him never actually having ended as such, as I've already mentioned, been ongoing since 2011. And Assad is wanted on a French arrest warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity, which is a bit rich given France is currently giving Netanyahu a free pass on just those crimes under the Rome Statute, under an ICC arrest warrant. But they have their own out against Assad, and that recently got upheld when it came under challenge, I think it was back in June. But you'll not see an ICC arrest warrant for Bashar al-Assad at all. None has ever been issued in relation to these civil war crimes because Syria is not signed up to the Rome Statute. And given all these crimes have happened in Syria and not outside it at any point, there is no jurisdiction for the ICC in this instance, unlike others. But what we're seeing now is a new development in that the jihadists appear to be succeeding. But who's backing them and how have they got this far, if that's the case then? Well, as far as allies go, this HTS bunch, they don't seem to have any permanent or reliable ones, shall we say. Turkey have backed them at times. By and large, when we're talking about HTS allies, Turkey is the name that comes up, but it's not been consistent. Qatar have allegedly also helped them, but it's never been proven, I don't think. That's just a claim that's been made. But because of that Turkey link, they are often referred to as Turkish allied HTS. But why here and why now, when the civil war nears its 14th year, have HTS suddenly come to prominence? And I'm not looking at Turkey in particularly when I considered this. The answer is more destabilization between Western interests in Israel and the so-called axis of resistance, of which Iran is the biggest player and the biggest supplier to their allies, which includes Syria, or as the Western media likes to refer to them as their proxies. Now, Hezbollah in Lebanon is also another such group, another such proxy, certainly meeting the terms of a ceasefire with Israel as it is right now, even as Israel abused that with impunity. But Lebanon's largest border by far is the one it shares with Syria, and by destabilizing Syria, by taking control of a major supply route, for example, like the M5 International Highway, supplies to Hezbollah from Iran could be massively disrupted. A destabilized Syria, more so than it is now, given a great many Russian troops are there fighting for Assad, and being on the losing end of this fight with HTS as things stand right now. This morning, in fact, they've taken control of the city of Aleppo completely, apparently. But this could all see Russian troops needed to beef up forces in Syria in order to repel this. They're being beaten. The state cannot have this, and Russia is an ally. That these jihadists are a useful tool to force this, because it would mean Russian troops having to be pulled from Ukraine to do that. And all of a sudden you can see the strings being pulled here by the US rather than Turkey, because that would be great news for their efforts in Europe, wouldn't it? Especially as we know Russia is now relying on North Korean troops. Apparently they're welcoming troops from Yemen as well. For Russia to have to pull some of their troops away from that, it's the last thing you can imagine Putin's going to want to do. But they need to support their allies. This is the thinking. Equally, as an ally of Iran, Iran's attention may be diverted to Syria as well because of this. And any planned retaliation against Israel for their last strike on them may be delayed as a result as well. All very win-win, not just for the US, but from Israel's perspective too, therefore. And on top of that, it is also known that Ukraine has provided advisors to those fighting Assad's regime on drone warfare. And now we come, all of a sudden, to this latest exploding pages story at last. Destabilizing and cutting off supply chains to Hezbollah from Iran by screwing up another Middle Eastern nation in Syria, more so than it has been already by its own government and its oppression and those opposing that, we suddenly have reports coming in that the Assad Syrian army has suffered from the same terrorist attack, it seems, that Hezbollah suffered at Israel's hands some months ago. Israel admitted the pager attack on Lebanon, thought they were brilliantly clever to have got these devices into Hezbollah hands. But of course the collateral damage was extensive, and for that reason this was designated as a terror attack, and Israel faced widespread global condemnation off the back of it. And we also know in the time since that it required years of planning, infiltration, intelligence agencies, cyber spies, so in come Unit 8200 and Mossad into this picture, that they were actually behind the pager attack. And now we've seen this repeated again, it's being alleged, in Syria. But to what extent is still open to conjecture. This is not being well documented, it's still breaking news largely, but this is also partly because of the state Syria is in and the difficulty of reporting from there. But graphic images have appeared online. Various commentators and notably US former military analyst Scott Ritter has also drawn attention to this. So you can only surmise that this is Israel's involvement here again. How long ago did they infiltrate the Syrian army then, assuming it took the same effort to do that as it did with Hezbollah in Lebanon? Assuming Russian and Iranian aid comes along to help Assad's regime, likely it will take months to turn things around. That is, months more where Israel can carry on its atrocities with those it fears most distracted with problems elsewhere. So this pager strike might actually have been completely unnecessary and stupid on their part, because nothing quite nails on their involvement than another pager attack would. And given it helps HTS in its fight against Assad, it's not so much Turkey, in my view, aiding HTS here, as I've said, but Israel. Israel-backed former Al-Qaeda terrorists, who even with everything we've borne witness to in Israel and Gaza and Lebanon and beyond, who'd thought that would be a statement anyone would end up being made. Yet here we are, making it. Syria turned into a new battleground is the best news Netanyahu will have had all week. You see, he's not had a very good week. And next week might not be much better if he ends up in court, as he's scheduled to, on Monday. Having got a ceasefire with Lebanon and with Hezbollah agreeing to it, Israel have abused it utterly. But his own people are asking why the ceasefire even actually happened when Netanyahu failed to secure any of the targets he set himself to justify invading Lebanon to begin with. Most Israelis think he's lost to Hezbollah, so when he tells them they can return to their homes in the north now, they're giving him short shrift about it, let's say. Get the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.